The archetype of the undying lake-dwelling killer represents one of horror's most enduring figures. Yet beneath the commercial franchise lies a complex mythology suggesting connections to covert experimentation, psychological warfare, and the transformation of human suffering into something that transcends mortality. This analysis explores the elaborate narrative framework constructed around this entity, examining themes of governmental secrecy, trauma weaponization, and the disturbing possibility that some horror originates not from supernatural sources, but from institutional cruelty concealed behind official silence. The mythology anchors itself in late 1970s Oregon, where 3 teenagers allegedly vanished from a remote campsite under circumstances that defied conventional explanation. The discovery of their abandoned tent bloodstained and marked with a name scratched onto broken, mirror glass established pattern that would recur throughout the narrative: violence without clear perpetrator. Official investigation swiftly terminated, and community-wide silence suggesting knowledge too dangerous to articulate. The immediate suppression of inquiry provides crucial thematic foundation. Local authorities removed from their positions, public records disappearing from archives, newspapers instructed to avoid coverage. These details suggest institutional power actively concealing information, rather than merely failing to solve mystery. The mythology proposes that what appears as incompetence actually represents coordination, that silence results from coercion rather than ignorance. This governmental involvement distinguishes the mythology from simple campfire tales. Rather than supernatural entity operating beyond human understanding, the narrative suggests something created or enabled by human agency, then deliberately obscured to prevent public awareness. The cover-up becomes as significant as the initial violence, implying that what happened threatens institutional legitimacy in ways that require aggressive suppression, regardless of cost to victims' families or public safety. The mythology incorporates disturbing claims about entertainment industry's relationship to authentic tragedy. A screenwriter allegedly arrived in the affected community shortly after the disappearances, conducting research that seemed focused on the specific details of the real case. His subsequent film project bore remarkable similarities to actual events, yet transformed them into commercial fiction that obscured rather than revealed their genuine origins. This appropriation raises uncomfortable questions about how real violence becomes commodified entertainment. The mythology suggests Hollywood didn't simply take inspiration from news reports, but actively participated in cover-up by transforming authentic horror into fictional narrative that would forever associate these events with fantasy rather than fact. Each viewer who dismissed the story as pure invention unwittingly contributed to suppressing awareness of actual victims and ongoing danger. The filmmakers alleged direct contact with witnesses, purchase of documents, and payments for silence suggest coordinated effort to acquire and control information. The mythology implies that entertainment production served intelligence purposes, gathering data about public knowledge while establishing fictional framework that would discredit future claims about authentic events. The commercial success of the resulting film franchise ensured that any subsequent revelation about real origins would seem like derivative conspiracy theory rather than legitimate historical correction. The mythology includes several witness accounts providing glimpses of what the official narrative suppressed. An elderly fisherman described observing a figure emerging from the lake deformed, scarred, moving with purpose inconsistent with drowning victim or random attacker. His subsequent death, officially attributed to natural causes, but accompanied by evidence of violence, established pattern of witness elimination that recurs throughout the narrative. These testimonies share common elements: the figure's distinctive appearance suggesting severe burn trauma, its association with the lake itself, and the witness's reluctance to speak openly about their experiences. The mythology presents these consistencies as evidence that multiple independent observers encountered the same entity, their accounts corroborating each other despite geographic and temporal separation. The fate of those who spoke publicly: mysterious deaths, disappearances, intimidation into silence creates chilling effect that reinforces the cover-up. The mythology suggests that institutional forces actively monitor for anyone attempting to reveal suppressed information, responding with violence calibrated to appear natural or coincidental. This ongoing enforcement indicates that whatever occurred remains relevant decades later, that the threat persists and the secret must be maintained regardless of body count required to ensure continued silence. Central to the mythology is the figure of the mother, a woman who allegedly raised a severely deformed child in isolation, witnessed his brutal victimization by cruel teenagers, and descended into homicidal madness motivated by protective rage, transformed into indiscriminate violence. Her diary, supposedly discovered decades later, provides psychological foundation for the entity's subsequent actions, while raising questions about where protective instinct ends and pathological obsession begins. The mother's institutionalization and subsequent disappearance add layers to the mystery. Her final message, "He's ready now," suggests she believed her son survived and had transformed into something capable of autonomous vengeance. Whether this represented delusional hope or genuine knowledge of his survival remains deliberately ambiguous within the mythology, allowing both supernatural and material interpretations of subsequent events. The mother's own violence, targeting random campers she perceived as the specific teenagers who harmed her child, demonstrates how trauma distorts perception and generates cycles of victimization. Her inability to distinguish between actual perpetrators and innocent strangers mirrors broader themes about how suffering, rather than generating wisdom or compassion, can instead produce indiscriminate cruelty that perpetuates rather than resolves original injustice. Perhaps the mythology's most disturbing element involves claims that governmental agencies conducted psychological warfare experiments using trauma to create controllable weapons of terror. Documents allegedly reference Project Revenant, a program exploring whether extreme suffering could produce entities capable of operating beyond normal human limitations, essentially weaponizing fear itself through creation of seemingly unstoppable predators. This framework transforms the narrative from supernatural horror into science fiction horror, suggesting that what appears paranormal actually results from classified research into consciousness, trauma response, and the boundaries of human resilience. The mythology proposes that certain individuals, subjected to sufficient psychological and physical damage under controlled conditions, might develop capabilities that mimic supernatural phenomena, not through magic but through mechanisms science recognizes but cannot publicly acknowledge without revealing unethical experimentation. The alleged classification of these projects, their connection to Cold War military research, and their focus on fear as strategic weapon ground the mythology in historical context. Real programs like MKUltra demonstrate that intelligence agencies did conduct ethically horrifying research on unwitting subjects, lending plausibility to claims about programs that might have pushed even further into territory where human subjects ceased being recognizably human. The mythology emphasizes the entity's apparent immunity to conventional harm, surviving multiple termination attempts, operating without apparent need for rest or sustenance, displaying strength and resilience beyond normal human capacity. These characteristics, rather than being attributed to supernatural origin, are explained through the experimental framework as resulting from trauma-induced transformation that fundamentally altered the subject's relationship to physical limitation. This pseudoscientific explanation for apparent immortality represents sophisticated narrative development. Rather than simply declaring it's magic, the mythology proposes mechanisms, extreme trauma rewiring survival responses, experimental interventions enhancing physical capabilities, psychological damage eliminating normal pain response, and self-preservation instincts that would cause ordinary humans to cease functioning. The entity continues operating not because it cannot die, but because it no longer recognizes damage as reason to stop. The claim that authorities attempted termination but failed, then shifted strategy toward containment through maintaining fearful legends that discourage civilians from entering certain areas, suggests ongoing institutional awareness and management. The mythology proposes that the entity remains active, its existence known to classified agencies that have concluded elimination proves impossible or impractical, making fear-based deterrence the only viable strategy for minimizing casualties while protecting institutional secrets. Throughout the mythology, similar incidents recur across decades: disappearances near isolated lakes, torn campsites, witnesses reporting tall masked figures, official explanations attributing deaths to natural causes despite evidence suggesting violence. This pattern establishes the entity's continued activity while demonstrating institutional commitment to maintaining cover-up regardless of mounting casualties. The geographic consistency incidents clustering around specific regions of the Pacific Northwest suggest territorial behavior, as if the entity remains tied to particular locations despite capacity for movement. The mythology interprets this as a combination of psychological attachment to original trauma site and strategic positioning in areas where low population density and challenging terrain enable activity while minimizing discovery risk. Seasonal patterns also emerge, with incidents concentrated during summer camping season when civilians most frequently enter remote areas. This timing could reflect increased opportunity, or might suggest the entity's activity responds to environmental or psychological triggers associated with specific times of year. The mythology leaves causation deliberately ambiguous, maintaining uncertainty about whether the pattern results from conscious strategy or unconscious compulsion. The mythology incorporates contemporary investigators who attempt documentary research into the legends, only to encounter suppression, equipment failure, and mysterious disappearances among team members. These modern narratives serve multiple functions, updating the mythology for contemporary audiences, demonstrating that the threat remains active, and warning against curiosity by showing how investigation itself proves dangerous. The use of modern technology, drones, digital cameras, encrypted communications creates interesting tension with the entity's apparently pre-technological origins. The mythology suggests the entity or its institutional protectors have adapted to contemporary surveillance capabilities, knowing how to avoid or disable recording equipment, how to identify and eliminate researchers before they can disseminate findings. This adaptability makes the threat feel current rather than historical, relevant to present-day audiences rather than safely relegated to past. The fate of these investigators' disappearances, corrupted data, official dismissal of their evidence reinforces the mythology's themes about institutional power and the impossibility of exposing secrets that powerful interests want suppressed. Even in era of internet communication and distributed information, the narrative suggests certain truths remain successfully concealed through combination of technological interference, witness elimination, and strategic deployment of ridicule to discredit legitimate claims. Fragmentary documents allegedly discovered by investigators provide glimpses of the experimental program's nature and objectives. A scientist's diary describes creating fear control through inhumane procedures performed on child subject who died and then came back, transformed into something that listens to the lake. These cryptic passages suggest the experiments achieved results their designers didn't fully understand or control. The diary's description of the mask as connection point rather than mere disguise introduces interesting metaphysical element. Rather than hiding identity, the mask supposedly serves as anchor or conduit, a physical object linking the entity to its past, while enabling its continued existence in present. This transforms simple prop into crucial component of the entity's nature, suggesting that destroying or removing the mask might disrupt its functioning in ways direct violence cannot achieve. The scientist's evident horror at what the program accomplished, combined with suggestion that the experiments aimed at national security objectives, captures tension between institutional justification for unethical research and individual moral recognition of lines that should never be crossed. The mythology suggests that even participants in these programs eventually recognized they had created something that couldn't be controlled or justified. yet by then the entity existed independently of its creator's intentions or desires. Investigators allegedly discover hidden facilities, buried hatches, leading to concrete corridors covered with scratched symbols, steel doors concealing spaces where something continues breathing decades after official program termination. These physical locations ground the mythology in material reality, suggesting the experiments occurred in actual places that could theoretically be located and explored, even as the narrative warns that such exploration proves fatal. The symbolism scratched into walls, described as carved with nails or knives, suggests either the subject's attempts at communication or expression, or perhaps ritualistic marking by those who maintain the facility. The ambiguity about whether these symbols represent the entity's work or its captors' activities creates uncertainty about the power dynamics within these spaces. Was the subject imprisoned victim, or had it become dominant presence that its supposed controllers feared? The continuing sounds within sealed facilities decades after abandonment suggest either ongoing occupation or perhaps recording devices programmed to create auditory illusions deterring investigation. The mythology deliberately maintains ambiguity about which explanation proves correct, allowing both supernatural interpretation, the entity truly dwells in these spaces, and material interpretation, sophisticated security systems designed to prevent discovery of what really occurred. The mythology emphasizes how the entity, or the suppression apparatus surrounding it, has adapted to changing technological and social contexts. Where historical accounts describe physical stalking and direct violence, contemporary reports involve electronic interference, data corruption, and strategic manipulation of digital communications. This evolution demonstrates that whatever forces maintain the secret, whether the entity itself or institutional protectors, understand modern information systems and can exploit them effectively. The claim that video footage inexplicably corrupts, that files disappear from devices, that electronic equipment fails in the entity's presence, creates interesting uncertainty about whether these effects result from supernatural influence or from sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities deployed by agencies monitoring for investigation attempts. The mythology benefits from this ambiguity, as either explanation proves disturbing supernatural entity adapting to modern world, or governmental apparatus with technological capability to remotely compromise civilian electronics. The spread of information through dark web and encrypted channels, only to be systematically removed and those who posted it subsequently disappearing, suggests active monitoring of online communities and willingness to eliminate witnesses even in contemporary surveillance society. The mythology proposes that power structures possess capabilities exceeding what they publicly acknowledge, that privacy and information security prove illusory when classified interests decide suppression justifies any necessary action. Whether interpreted as literal truth or elaborate allegory, the mythology explores how extreme trauma might fundamentally alter consciousness and physical capability. The entity's apparent inability to die, feel pain, or abandon its vengeful purpose could represent extreme dissociation, psychological fragmentation so severe that normal human limitations cease applying. Alternatively, these characteristics might result from experimental interventions that achieved their objective of creating enhanced operative but lost control over what they created. The entities focus on specific locations and victim categories, those who enter its territory, particularly young people engaged in recreational activities, suggests either psychological fixation on original trauma or program targeting parameters. The mythology leaves open whether the entity possesses genuine autonomy or operates according to conditioning established during the experimental period, raising disturbing questions about the boundaries between person and weapon, victim and perpetrator. The mother's belief that her son remains somehow present and capable of action, despite apparent death, introduces interesting question about consciousness and identity. If the entity truly represents what he became rather than something entirely replacing him, Does it retain any awareness of its previous existence? Or has trauma and transformation obliterated original personality entirely? The mythology deliberately avoids answering, maintaining uncertainty about whether the entity possesses genuine subjectivity or operates as biological automaton executing programmed responses. This elaborate mythology, whether approached as speculative fiction or disturbing possibility, explores how institutions might create and subsequently conceal horrors, exceeding anything individuals could achieve independently. The narrative suggests that some of our most frightening possibilities emerge not from supernatural sources but from organized human activity, experimental programs that cross ethical boundaries, cover-ups that sacrifice public safety to protect institutional reputation, and ongoing suppression enforced through violence against anyone who approaches suppressed truth. For mature audiences, the mythology offers contemplation of power, secrecy, and the transformation of human suffering into weapon or deterrent. It raises questions about what classified programs might accomplish beyond public awareness, about how trauma propagates across generations and communities, about the relationship between entertainment and suppression of authentic history. The lake-dwelling entity becomes symbol for consequences of institutional cruelty. Once created, it cannot be controlled or eliminated, only contained and concealed, while it continues operating according to logic its creators established, but cannot revoke. Whether the specific claims possess any factual basis matters less than the uncomfortable truths they represent. Real governments did conduct unethical experiments. Real cover-ups do sacrifice victims to protect secrets. Real violence does occur in isolated locations where institutional power determines what becomes public knowledge. The mythology succeeds by exploiting realistic uncertainty about how far such programs might have gone and what their unacknowledged legacy might be. The entity waits in the deep water, patient and purposeful, whether as literal threat or as metaphor for violence, whose origins remain deliberately obscured by those who caused it and now deny responsibility while ensuring it continues serving their purposes.